Hello there, my favorite randos on the internet. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Let's Disagree and Other Interesting Conversations. I'm happy to welcome to today's episode our guest, Jonathan Young. Jonathan, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. It's definitely going to be a nice day out, but it will be hot. So I'll be staying indoors.
Great. Well, John, introduce yourself to the audience since this is your first time on Let's Disagree.
Right. Of course, my name is John. Last name is Young. That's John is short for Jonathan. That's why there's no H. I'm an active member of the church my whole life, born in the church. I've lived in Idaho. I think we both live in Boise. Mm-hmm. Maybe just real quickly, I born and raised in Sacramento, California. If you're from Idaho, don't let that scare you too much because my grandparents are on both sides are from Idaho. So I'm really just an Idahoan coming back. I went to, after high school, I joined the Army. So I have some military in my background. And after that, I got married, went to college. I currently work as a computer engineer, which I primarily make circuit boards right now. I do firmware programming. It's like software that runs on a device that's not typically something you would interact with directly, or if you do, not very long. I think that's it in a nutshell. I do enjoy my work, but it's not related to what we're talking about today. I just find myself more and more fascinated with, I guess the search for truth out there on YouTube between Latter-day Saints, ex-Mormons. And I think there's a lot of good ideas put out there on folks in both camps. Mm-hmm. And I just find it real interesting. As for currently my relationship to the church is very good. I teach elders quorum. It's that and teaching. I think I used to really enjoy working with the youth. Now I'm more finding joy in working with the elders, mostly men older than me, but I feel like I have a lot to teach them, new ways of looking at things. Sometimes I get a little pushback because I do kind of try to talk about things that might be on the borders, but still inside, where you're allowed to be, but present those ideas in ways that are faith promoting and I think helpful and pastoral.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about your approach, John. John and I, since we're local to each other, we had a chance to grab lunch recently, and we talked about a whole, slew of topics. And one of the things that we talked about is John, kind of from his perspective as a believing Latter-day Saint, myself from my perspective as what I would consider a post-Mormon, no longer a believer, but still actively engaged in talking about the church and thinking about some of these things. We both have some critiques of Jacob Hansen's collective witness model. So now that I don't want to bury the lead any further, that's what we'll be talking about today. Is we'll be talking about some of John's perspectives on Jacob Hansen's collective witness model. I've talked about Jacob a few times on this channel. I've talked about him way more on different channels when I've done responses to him and things. Jacob and I have actually had a conversation at one point. But for folks who are unaware, I wanted to just introduce them kind of to Jacob's take on the gospel. I would say one of the things that's interesting to me about him is he is one of these folks that is like very fundamental when it comes to certain aspects and really his own particular interpretation of the family proclamation. So in this video, this was from a live stream he had done with Word Radio. I just pulled it from Word Radio's Facebook page. He's talking pretty animatedly about Charlie Bird. So John's going to live react to this because he hadn't heard it yet. But the caption here is they call him Hot Take Hansen for a reason.
Are people willing to die for this church anymore? How many people are willing to die for it?
Yeah.
As a percentage. Okay, let's say today it's 30%. But how many was in the pioneer era? It was like 90%. If you start to take your core membership and actually give them something to really believe in and be united around, you'll get something. And here's the thing, we're not united. We're incredibly divided. because we've lost our sense of who we are as Latter-day Saints. You have such a wide variety of, see, we talk about diversity as though it's a strength. Let me tell you something. Ideological diversity is a cancer. And in the church, we have ideological diversity to where you go everywhere. You have people cheering for Charlie Bird, who is literally with his gay partner, purchasing a child because they want to be parents. They're going to have a baby created through in vitro fertilization of another woman, and they're going to deprive a child of its mother. And there are active, faithful Latter-day Saints cheering for Charlie Bird and his partner as they deny a child their mother. And we are divided on that issue as Latter-day Saints. Me bringing this up is controversial. Are you kidding me?
All right. So, John, I know you're live reacting to that. Yeah, wild is right. I'm struck by a few things on this, which is, I've talked with Jim Bennett a number of times about his dislike for active members of the church who make the family proclamation mean bigotry against LGBTQ people is the centerpiece of their faith, I think is the way that Jim has put it on repeat. I think it's really hard for me to see Jacob's comments there as anything but bigotry against LGBTQ people, because his animus towards in vitro fertilization in this instance would apply just as evenly if Charlie Bird was married to a woman that couldn't conceive and they were using in vitro fertilization to, build a family. The same exact logic would apply. You could just replace the nouns, and I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I think you're correct about that. In my family, we have a disabled child, and at times we've had caretakers. Usually they have some kind of pre-nursing or nursing background. And one of them, just a beautiful woman, and she's I think a non-denominational Christian. She's very Christian. She posts about it on Facebook a lot. But she was, I guess, a serial surrogate mother, right? People would pay her lots of money to have these children. And she was really good at, I guess, being in that role. And she's very smart. Now she's like a lead nurse at one of our local facilities, I guess maybe St. Luke's or St. Al's. But she used that money to get through college. And I just remember, maybe that's something of a controversial issue for some members of the church, but my wife would talk about her and say, oh, she does this and does that. And, just knowing this person, it's hard to see how anyone would think that what she was doing was some kind of great sin. Mm-hmm. You might be able to be critical of it, like maybe these parents should try to adopt. I don't know, but honestly, it's hard to make something so terrible out of it. And you certainly wouldn't say that those parents, who I think most of them were straight, and there's no way you'd say they're buying a child off of her. Right. Those were, genetically, they belong to those parents. And even if they were gay, the child probably genetically belonged to one of them.
Right.
So, yeah, I have a hard time understanding his animus.
Yeah, the other thing I'm struck by is the phrase he said, I think he said, ideological diversity is a cancer. And I don't know, that's such an odd thing to say, because what that tells me is that Jacob is just very afraid of other people having opinions different than his, and that he feels like he has to attack them. Obviously, every group has to deal with legitimate questions of like boundary maintenance. What does it mean to be inside or outside of this group? But to go so far as to call ideological diversity a cancer, I think is just such a juvenile take to me. I think we get a lot of advantages from ideological diversity, because the alternative is just you've got a whole bunch of people with the exact same opinion. And that seems to be the type of church that Jacob wants.
Yeah, and I think he did say we've never been more divided than we have been today. And I think people say that about our country as well as the church. Mm-hmm. And, the more I learn about the past, I'm starting to doubt that perspective. Maybe we are more divided today than at some times in the past.
Sure.
But like with our nation, look at the Civil War. But you can also look at like the founding of our church under Joseph Smith. There's a lot of diversity of thought and ideas. And part of Joseph's learning process as a prophet was to try to sort through and say, okay, this is good, this is bad. Here's where we are. Here's where we're not. But I think we've always had some controversial issues that we've dealt with as a church.
Yeah. So that was just a brief, I guess, introduction for the audience to Jacob Hansen and some of Jacob Hansen's ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about his epistemological model that he shared online called the collective witness model. So, John, before I pull up the slides you've prepped for today, can you just briefly explain Jacob's collective witness model in its strongest and most charitable form? Basically, let's do a Steelman version, unless we have it in the slides already.
Yeah.
There it is, I guess.
So that's what it looks like. So he's got a couple of versions of this out. The most recent version has 5 witnesses, and that includes the 3 that you see here, except instead of the spirit, he'll call that intuition. And collective witnesses, he'll refer to that as authority. The 2 additional ones that he's added are sense experience, things like you see and hear and touch and feel,
right.
And outcomes. That's kind of like the feedback loop that you get. Like you think something's right, you apply that to the world, it comes back to bite you, and you're like, okay, maybe that wasn't that. Maybe I need to edit my reasoning or something like that. But that's later. I think that's like maybe 3-4 years ago. He has those 5 models. He's done videos of those. I think his first video, when he looks at the church, he focuses on these 3 witnesses, and he calls them reason, spirit, and collective witness. So what he's trying to do is, if you think about, and I might use this analogy in different ways later, but you want to do a poll to find out who do Americans think they want for their next president. You don't just ask people in California, because sometimes they'll be right. More often or not recently, they might be wrong. So you want to make sure you get a good polling around the country of different people that's relative to, basically you want to do something that's very random, poll people randomly.
Yeah, like actually get a representative sample. And
right.
Are you saying that's the way
he's trying to do here?
Yeah, and that's the way he looks at truth, basically, is that you've got these different lenses that you're going to use to determine truth. If I understand his model correctly. One of the things I'm struck by with the addition of the sense data and the outcomes is, especially the outcomes one, seems like it's just building the fallacy of an appeal to consequences just directly into an epistemological model. So that would be one critique just right off the top of my head. But anyways, why do you feel like Jacob developed this collective witness model? Like with yourself as a believing Latter-day Saint, what problem is he trying to solve for believing Latter-day Saints?
Right. So we have this idea of prophets, right? We have a prophet in our church. This is modeled after the Old Testament prophets. They speak for the Lord. You often hear the term mouthpiece of the Lord. I hear that a lot today. And we believe that they, when they speak for the Lord, it's as if the Lord himself is saying it. And therefore you have to give it the utmost concern and priority in your life. The problem is that we, like everybody's given what we call agency, where we make our own choices. I think we also recognize we all have the ability to rationalize incorrectly, and maybe we've got our own biases and things like that. So we also say, prophets are not perfect. And I think there's an old joke out there, something that goes something like, Catholics, how do I put this? The Catholics believe the Pope is...
Or I think it's Catholics say the Pope is infallible, but nobody believes it. Mormons say the prophet is infallible and nobody believes it, I think is the way I've heard it put before.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So that's the way it works. We do speak highly of our prophets, but we don't really well, we speak highly of our prophets, but we also say, yeah, they're not perfect, but we're really good at following them, at least I think on paper and in front of one another.
So do you feel like the way that Jacob's developed this model, that he's trying to kind of solve the problem or solve the issue of how do we sort out like conflicting opinions amongst the prophets? That's what I feel like you're saying here. Is that right?
Right. That's under the collective witness part, right? Is like
Okay.
sometimes prophets get things wrong. At least in retrospect, we'll understand that. And sometimes, when you're listening to conference, some of us will hear some apostle say something like, yeah, I don't know if I like that. So you got to figure out, how do you know what the mind and will of God is? If God is talking to these men and yet they're kind of adding some static to it, being able to, maybe filter out that static by putting all their voices together and amplifying the signal, that you can really know what's really being said by God, what his real message is.
Okay.
But then we also believe in personal revelation.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine, for example, commandments come down from the top, and they might be everybody should serve a mission. And for a long time, well, some people can't serve a mission. So, you're kind of an exception if you have a physical disability of some kind. And I think the church has done a great job lately with service missions on helping more people be able to serve their communities in important ways. So, yeah, we all have our own spirit that tells us, hey, you hear the prophetic counsel, here's what you can do with it. But maybe you can't do everything with it you would want to, but you can do your best. Reason, I think it goes without saying, we all think about things. We use reason a lot. And that seems to be an input as well. How we connect the dots between all these inputs we receive from the Spirit, from the collective witness.
Great. Are we ready for the next slide?
I think so. So this is a bit of history. Probably a few months ago, I was just poking around YouTube, looking at Mormon book reviews. Shout out to one of my favorite YouTube channels. And I think
Steve
I've seen you on there. Yeah, I just love how he does things. And he had this episode of the Jim Bennett and Jacob Hansen on. And Jacob Hansen, and I do agree with Jim Bennett on this. Like, a lot of the stuff he does, I think is pretty good. He's very thoughtful in some ways, especially when he's like defending the church or pointing out, inconsistencies perhaps in how, I don't know, on how other Christians may think of things and how we do. I think he does a good job at ambassadoring for the church in some ways. But when it comes to looking inside the church, and he starts to attack fellow members for ideas that he doesn't like.
Right.
And in this case, I think they're talking about the family proclamation. To what extent can changes happen? Do we expect changes to happen in the future? And it's not real clear exactly what issue they're talking about, or if it's just a collective vibe. Like, Jim's vibe is more towards, yeah, we'll see changes. Maybe we don't know what they are, but we can expect it. And I think Jacob's more on the vibe of, no, nothing's changing. We're sticking with this. And I think what a couple of times Jacob brought up this collective witness model. Hey, Jim, have you heard of my collective witness model? Hey, you don't understand the model. Here's how the model works. And in this, I think I'll quote some of this. He says that the collective witness model helps us, look at the scriptures and the modern prophet and kind of converge or intersect on truth that way. He points out that that's how you can understand what's most likely true in matters of church doctrine. And he also mentions like the priesthood ban. It's like the priesthood ban was never consistent with the scriptures, but I think both Stephen Pinecker and Jim Bennett were pushing back, saying, well, what about the priesthood ban? Trying to point out these things that have changed. He's like, well, that just that wasn't consistent, right? It violated the collective witness of the prophets over time. So Jacob, clearly, even though this is 3 years ago, this is very important to him.
Yeah, and Jacob's just on that, at least on that last one, Jacob's just factually wrong about that. He's actually changed from saying that. When I pointed out to him, I think at one point, just like behind the scenes, that the priesthood ban, regardless of how you feel about it, obviously I would rather the church had never have done that. but it is explicitly in the book of Abraham a reference to the priesthood ban and to cursed lineages through this cursed line of Ham is directly in the book of Abraham. So I just don't think Jacob is correct about that factually. Great.
Yeah, I agree. And we may talk about that again. I might bring that up on future slides as an example that demonstrates how, one of my points as to, issues we could be finding with this model.
Okay, great. So here's kind of the witnesses of truth we talked about.
Yeah, and I did leave a link on the slide. I don't know. I don't think users can click on it, but that's just there for reference.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's just the same thing as the, this is a screen grab from his initial video, that at least the earliest one that I can find, where he describes this model for use in within our church. So you can go to the next slide.
Great.
All right, so first question I have is like, well, how much do we weight these three witnesses, right? And I mean, you have a reasoned witness, a spirit witness, and then there's a collective witness where you've averaged out, the prophets in some way. Maybe it's not a perfect average. I think Jacob does say he gives a little more weight to modern prophets, but I am kind of concerned. Like what the prophet says today, what is he like? What does he come to? 5% of the collective witnesses? I'm not sure.
Right.
But it's not clear, when you're thinking about these things, are we mathematically thinking about this right? I don't know. So it's really kind of hard to figure out, at least, how do you know when to doubt the reason or when to upgrade the spirit? Those are issues we all have to struggle with in trying to apply this model.
Yeah, this is actually one of the biggest critiques I actually have of Jacob's collective witness model, is that it isn't a consistently applied epistemology. And what I mean by that is, if you can tweak the weighting dependent on the question that you're trying to answer. Now, there may be legitimate reasons to apply different weightings of like different types of evidence on certain questions. But my big concern is if you are like just ad hoc deciding how much weight to give to each individual prophetic witness or the spirit or to reason or the collective witness altogether, is how do you know you're not just engaged in confirmation bias? That would be my real clear question for Jacob. Like if the weighting can always shift, even if you're not trying to shift it according to your needs, how do you know you're not doing that unintentionally? Because one of the things we know from studying critical thinking and from just basic human psychology is how often our beliefs, or how often our brains, want to confirm our existing beliefs, right? That's the idea known as confirmation bias. And it's something that we have to build into our worldview or into our epistemology to attempt to correct for. And my big concern with a sliding scale kind of weighting on these different, whether we've got the 3 or the 5 factors that Jacob's talked about, is how do you know that you're not just engaged in confirmation bias? Because it looks to me a lot like a form of almost like special pleading as an epistemology. Like I'm going to just pick and choose which gets the most weight according to the needs of the argument.
Right. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of room for confirmation bias to enter this model. One thing I like that you said is you mentioned types of questions. And I'm not sure this is what you're getting at, but I think some questions could be answered with this fairly easily. Sure. Give an example. If I were a reporter or a journalist, and I want to say, okay, here's what Mormons or Latter-day Saints believe about this issue. And they could look at the collective witness of what apostles and prophets have been saying about that issue. I think that's pretty good. Right. Or they may ask you personally, how do you feel about this issue? And you can just look at your internal intuitions, what you feel the Spirit's told you and your reason, and you can come up with something as an individual. So I think it does depend a lot on the question, how well this model fits and how well it doesn't.
Yeah, the other thing I'm struck by is for a lot of the innovations, like whatever position one holds about Joseph Smith's calling as a prophet, because obviously you view him as a prophet, I view him slightly differently. But one of the things that I appreciate about Joseph Smith is the way that he innovated on the Christianity that existed in his day. And I'll give you an example where I think Jacob's model would run into issues. In Doctrine and Covenants 19, Joseph Smith reveals like a new understanding of hell, of the idea of eternal punishment, right? That eternal punishment is only called that because it is God's punishment and God's name is eternal, or that is one of his names and titles.
Yeah.
At that time that Joseph Smith receives this revelation, there is no other witness that takes this interpretation of these verses, right? So at that point, I guess I just struggle to see how Jacob's model makes room for legitimate, like, revelatory innovation, because when you've got a weighting on the collective prophetic witness, it seems like it would run into issues anytime there's like a new revelation or a new added depth to the scriptures, again, regardless of whether one believes or doesn't believe in those things.
Yeah, I think with hell in particular, you're right. Not an expert on the history of American religion, like some people might be, but I think hell in Protestantism today and Catholicism, and I'm going to guess that it was probably pretty standard back then that, hey, you go to heaven or you go to hell. And there's got to be a hard dividing line somewhere. But those who read the Bible very closely, and scholars, as they've started to realize, some of the King James translations were taking words like Hades and Gehenna and calling them hell. And we added all sorts of layers of meaning on top of that were never original to scriptures. You could maybe reason yourself using those, that testament of biblical scholarship to say, you know what, maybe hell doesn't weigh out like it's supposed to. The problem is that if you use the collective witness model and you don't have access to that Bible scholarship, there's no way you're going to come into a different version understanding of hell. Right? You can't do it. The scholarship wasn't there back then.
Right. So this is where Jacob continues to talk more about collective witness of those prophets, right?
Right. And I don't know that I have to go ahead and read all that, because I think we've gone through this. But this is a screenshot from his original video. This is before he had the really fancy studio. Looks like he's maybe just in a room in his house with his wonderful patriotic flag in the background, which I do have a patriotic flag on my cup. So we're not that different. Anyway, here he just explains that, I'll read a part of this, is when the idea is that I'm looking for the patterns of prophetic teaching over time. Now, this does not mean that new ideas can't be introduced by living prophets, but when they introduce something that is morally or theologically inconsistent with what the other prophets have said, or if my own reason or spiritual promptings, push me against it, I'm going to be more leery of what they're saying, because I don't follow infallible prophets blindly, nor should you.
So he's actually addressing the issue that I was just talking about, but I'm not sure he's actually addressing it, because he's not talking about how you weigh like a new innovation or a new idea introduced by a prophet against the other prophetic witness. I guess he's just saying he's a little bit more leery of it, but I don't know. Again, kind of my comment about the methodology, I don't really understand methodologically how that looks in action. This is just a very general kind of statement.
Yeah, maybe to be fair to Jacob, this is this is very early in his maybe conceptualizing of this idea, but you're right. I don't really see how the collective witness model, as he's articulated it, really can allow anything new to come up without serious difficulty.
Right. All right, I'll move to the next one.
All right, so he gives an example in the same video, and he shows a whole line of prophets going from Adam to Russell M. Nelson, and he has a little figure there for me or him saying, "What do y'all think?" And the collective witness of all the prophets says, "God lives. Oh, you should repent, have faith, sacrifice, and be saved." And well, I have a lot of problems with this. God lives, I think, is pretty decent, but what's the nature of the God that lives?
Right.
These people have different ideas. I also enjoy watching a lot of Dan McClellan.
Mhm.
And he points out, well, God here is different than God there in the same Old Testament, sometimes in the same book, right?
Right.
And repentance, what do you repent of? What does repentance look like? Do you have to give God something like you have to give him a goat in order to repent, right? Or do you have a broken heart? And these things change, and we can go in. He would probably go into details of like, well, that was the Old Testament, is a lesser law, different law. Christ came, changed a bunch of stuff. But even that, I think, is up to more debate than we often allow for in the church.
Yeah, it's like when you zoom out, because the purpose of what he's doing with this graphic is he's trying to make it look like the prophets agree on most things. And I think what I'm getting from your comments is that's true if we zoom out and we're talking at a very abstract level, like you said. I'll just pick the first one. God lives. Well, yeah, but the nature of that God, what power that God possesses, that God's role relative to other gods, many of these prophets disagree on the basics of that question about who this God is. And I think it's important for Latter-day Saints that want to continue to believe to build some type of epistemological model that can work with that reality, right? We don't want to deny fact to maintain faith. So in that sense, I think Jacob's effort to try and build an epistemology that can make this work is admirable. But I think one of the purposes I feel like I try and do towards the believing Latter-day Saint community is to point out when the faith that is being built is brittle faith. And what I mean by that is when it's not really dealing with the full weight of the skeptical problem, or the problem that a skeptic might point out. And the problem I see here, and Jacob's model falls into that camp, is these guys agree so far as you're able to like zoom out enough to that abstract level. But if you are really someone who's dealing with those intricate questions, those detail-oriented questions, I think just pretending that the abstract agrees doesn't really wrestle with the reality of the problem, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of it's hand waving over the reality of the problem.
Right.
And even be saved. I mean, does be saved, is that it? That's not really an Old Testament thing. I mean, I think we interpret saved into it, but they don't have an idea, I think, they have an idea of reconciling with God,
right,
of getting him on your side so that you as a nation can prosper. But I don't know if there's not a be saved so that in the next life you can live with God and escape, lower kingdoms or anything like that. They just don't have that concept then.
Right. It's also like the Jewish tradition, or my understanding of the Jewish tradition was some discussion with one of my Jewish friends about like their Day of Atonement celebration, is there's also an element of it, like you said, John, that is more focused on a people group, a community. It's not as individual a thing as I think Christianity and then later Mormonism makes it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's look at the next slide. Oh yeah, you're on it. Okay. So he gives a one example, and I think this is a good example. He points out that, and some of us know this, that Brigham Young once taught that Adam is the same person as God the Father.
Right.
And this is confusing to a lot of us. I think back then at the time, a lot of people accepted it, but then it just fell out of favor. I don't know that he ever had a majority of the church on board with that. And at least those who ascended to the prophetic calling at the head of the church didn't really buy into it. So, you can look at what did the prophets say over time. You don't see Adam as God in the Old Testament. You don't see him any of the modern revealed scriptures. He's not in the Book of Mormon. He's pretty much only Brigham and some people who maybe thought that he was right about it spoke up on it. So I think this is a good example, an easy one, where you can say, if you were to ask a scholar of Latter-day Saint religion, do Mormons believe Adam is God? And he would do something like this. He'd be like, no, they don't. Well, one prophet said that once, but nobody really takes that seriously.
Right.
All right. Then he points out culture. And this is, this is like how when you do a poll for who's going to be the next president, right? You don't just ask people. There's all sorts of cultures in the United States, and some cultures might say, "Oh, we love the Democrat." And others will say, "Oh, we love the Republican." Rural versus, in the cities and urban areas. So we're kind of doing the same thing here with the collective witness model. Is just, he brings up a couple issues like Old Testament violence. He calls it Stone Age violence. So this Stone Age violence, God says, do this, right? So I don't think you can blow it off super easily as this is just Stone Age violence. But God commands it there, but he doesn't command it later. So if you think that, well, maybe the prophets of the Old Testament are fallible, then they may have been taking their nationalistic desires and desire to conquer their enemies and said, hey, God is telling us to do it, right? That's possible. They could be making a mistake. So actually, I kind of applaud him for that. I kind of feel the same way.
Sure.
God sometimes serves our needs for us, which we also talk about a little bit later. Go ahead.
Let me jump in right there and just say,
sure.
I agree with that too. But as I'm reading what you've pulled from the video on the slide here, right? He says, so we can feel less obligated to consider such the mind and will of God if those nations violate reason and the spirit within us. And specifically, he's talking about that Stone Age violence and then racial theories from the 1800s. I think the big issue I see with this is how can one know that they're not just falling into the same trap, right? That they only view those things as a problem, meaning the violence and the racism, because of their culture. And so that would be my big question is, how do we know we're not just substituting the cultural norms of their time for the cultural norms of our time? And how can we be certain or at least have a reasonable assurance that we're really, receiving the mind and will of God, as Jacob puts it here, on those things? Because to me, when he says, if those violate reason and the spirit within us, that to me suggests like, well, those things are probably heavily informed, just as they were for the prophets that Jacob's critiquing, by the culture. So in one sense, it's almost just like a comparison potentially of cultural norms of the day.
Exactly. And I he shows in the little graphic there, he has me and he's standing outside these cultures, but really he's embedded in the modern culture.
Exactly.
And not only that modern culture, his conservative leaning, I would call it Republican-ish modern culture. And it's even different from my culture and the way I normally approach things. So we all kind of have this cultural influence around us, and it's really hard to divorce our thinking and our intuitions and what we think the spirit is telling us from those cultures.
Sure.
All right. So I found what I'm going to call 8 problems. I hope
8
that
problems
list isn't too
for
long.
one of the witnesses.
For just one of them, right? And I won't name them all here. For those of you watching, you can see it. But let's look at the first one.
Intuitive witness selection.
Right. Go to the next slide. Okay. And I did break this down into 3 different parts. So when we decide on what prophetic witness we look at, we might think, oh, we're just looking at all of them. But under the surface, we might be selecting. For example, you can select certain prophets and ignore others. Now, I'm not saying you're not selecting them because they don't have anything good to say. You just maybe they don't come up in your mind as being applicable for some reason.
Right.
And
if we just look at this from the lens of the current makeup of the quorum of the 12, I think every member has certain apostles that they just connect with more than others. For example, I was never a big fan of Boyd Packer or David Bednar as a believer, just because I felt like the messages they took out of and then used to recapitulate the gospel just were not really the ways that appealed to me about the gospel, right? The gospel to me was more about pastoral care. And so one of the things I think you're pointing out here is, how do we know we're not just even unawarely selecting the prophets or the witnesses that already agree with what we want the truth to be in the first instance.
Yeah, and I got to admit too, there's certain apostles. I'll name Uchtdorf as one. It's like when he gets up to speak in conference, I go, "Ooh," you know, my ears perk up, and I'm like, you know, sometimes I'm like, "Oh, that was kind of just a normal bland talk," but other times I'm really impressed. You know, and we all do that, maybe without thinking about it.
Right.
And you know, also we have a lot of silent witnesses, especially over time. Right? You may get agreement between say Abraham and Joseph Smith, and no one else talks about it. And I think a good example of this might be, maybe we can talk about this a little more later if we have time, but consider, you know, like homosexuality in the Bible. Homosexuality is not even the right word. It's same-sex intercourse.
Right.
And it's mentioned once in, I think, Leviticus, and then not talked about.
Yeah, but bottom line is Jesus and Joseph Smith said nothing about it. So, and I think that's a good framing because how we started this episode looking at that video from Jacob, it's interesting to me that there are certain people in the church, I would say Jacob included, who have made this fundamentalist reading of the family proclamation the centerpiece of their faith, even though Jesus and Joseph Smith never said anything about it. And I also like to point out that the family proclamation has never been canonized. There is a process for formal canonization of new scriptures in the church, and that has not occurred with the family proclamation. So, for what it's worth.
No, that's a great example, and it shows how you can have silence, but not where you might see consensus, but there's really not consensus. A lot of people or prophets or apostles will self-censor because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to fight in front of the kids, you know, things like that. And the other one is we can weigh them arbitrarily. In this graphic, this is meant to be somewhat humorous, but I think a lot of people still believe that the stick of Bruce is still scripture. And I hear Bruce R. McConkie is quoted often, usually by older members. I even have an old version, an old copy of Mormon Doctrine I got from my father when he was younger than I am now. And, you know, a lot of stuff in it is just kind of funny. We had the missionaries over to our house recently, and they did a card trick to demonstrate a spiritual idea. And I said, you know what Bruce R. McConkie said about playing cards? And I pulled out the Mormon Doctrine, and the missionaries just rolled their eyes about it. You know, like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But you'll still, you know, a lot of people weigh him, especially in the older generation, more than something any modern prophet could say. You could find people contradicting him, and that just doesn't seem to matter. At least maybe they don't think it, but Bruce R. McConkie is like the authority on stuff. More so in the past than the day, thank goodness.
Right.
All right. Then we also have what I call missing witnesses, right? I'm not a great scriptorian. I don't know every prophet that's existed or that's in scripture that I have today. And when I do read them, maybe I don't quite understand them, but maybe I haven't studied or read them very well. Definitely in years past, like in the 70s, 60s, and 50s, I don't know a lot of conference talks. You can't say to me, remember that conference talk by Hugh B. Brown? I'm like, no, I don't remember any of them. I just don't. So I can't really select them as witnesses. And I think I mentioned earlier, Bible scholars, they can help us understand, you know, what older prophets were really trying to say that maybe we've misunderstood over the years due to tradition or due to translation problems. And I already mentioned prophetic self-censoring. They take themselves out of the witness pool. And I think another good example of that would be David O. McKay and Gordon B. Hinckley had very soft, almost embracing opinions on evolution, but they didn't go out there and make the point in front of everybody all the time and write books on it. And the guys who did write the books on it and did push the issue and were loud and vocal, they lived longer, right? And we're still getting over the after effects of that.
Yeah, and one effect of this self-censoring this self-censoring principle that you've just pointed out here is it almost allows for the people who have the strongest opinions and who voice those opinions the most
Absolutely.
to control kind of what that collective witness looks like. I think about it would be Joseph Fielding Smith. He was one that was stridently against evolution, and was Bruce R. McConkie's father-in-law. That's where Bruce R. McConkie got a lot of his ideas, was from Joseph Fielding Smith and his series of books. And there was actually a book he wrote that he was told not to release by the prophet of the church at the time, right? And he did it anyways. And then it became an issue. And I guess I just see there's kind of a weird incentive, right? If we use the collective witness to determine what the truth is, there's a weird incentive for prophets who just have very strong opinions to, I don't know. I just see the problem that you're pointing out here, where prophets who are maybe softer or are willing to be a little less certain, that as they self-censor themselves, it just allows for the people who are the loudest voices in the room to basically control what the doctrine then becomes.
Right. And I think members of the church who value and love certainty, when they get certain language that echoes certainty or feels certain to them, they're more likely to accept it than someone's like, evolution, I don't know how that fits in. And I think we should be open to something new, but we don't know where it's going to go. They're like, what can I do with that? I need to know something certain now.
Right.
It's hard it's just a mindset I think a lot of us have. And the more we feed on it, the more we just spread it.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Problem number 3, intuitive interpretation, right? So we live and this goes back to the culture problem.
Right.
We don't understand their culture very well. And in this graphic, I have the author of the book of Genesis 1. He's seeing a completely different cosmology than we understand today.
Right.
Where you have this dome, maybe a translucent dome over the earth that keeps the waters above, which the way I like to explain it is this. You look at the sky and you see that it's blue. You look at the ocean or you look at a lake or a river, the color is blue. Well, water comes out of the sky.
Right.
Oh, there's water up there. I just think that makes sense, right? You don't have all this modern science to tell you any differently about blue light being scattered.
Right.
So that just makes sense to them. And I remember when I was reading Genesis as a 20-year-old and reading about this firmament, I'm like, oh man, I just love that word. And I'm like imagining all the things can be. It must be like the stars, pretty close. But the stars, I don't know. They're not exactly firmament either. But I had a lot of thoughts about what this might be, and I never could settle on one. But I just thought it was something magical. And I guess it is. If it really is a dome, it's kind of a magical thing. But I really couldn't understand it. It just seemed hard to internalize this word firmament. And I think nowadays a lot of people say things like, oh, the firmament must be, if it's water above it, must be water out there in the universe around us, because the stars have to be in the firmament. I don't know. It's the ether. It's outer space. So that's the problem with it. Exemplifies the problem, right?
Right. And the big problem I see, and you have it laid out really well here on this slide, where we've got people reading the same text, where the person writing the text and someone interpreting it, millennia later. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me about the question of like, how certain can we be based on understanding the scriptures, is it's almost like the scriptures themselves are abstract or vague enough that they can lend themselves to a modern interpretation when we know pretty definitively that the original authorial intent was, like you just talked about, something completely different, right? People today read these texts and they see the Big Bang in the beginning of God creating all of these things. And I'm not saying that reading is incorrect necessarily. I just am, I guess, pointing out the issue with certainty in any of these things when we have a text that's abstract or vague enough that it can be interpreted so vastly differently.
All right. So I grabbed a bunch of examples that for your
Mhm.
listeners to make this
Mhm.
point of intuitive interpretation. So this first example is in Genesis 1:26, where God says, "Let us make man in our image."
Mhm.
Well, who is the us? Scholars, I think, would say that in the past, it meant a pantheon of gods. And this pantheon, maybe it fell out of favor somewhat during the writing of Genesis 1:26, but this may be vestigial, or you may actually see it this way. That's probably the original meaning.
Mhm.
Maybe later traditions would see maybe just the Elohim, multiple gods, but it's a singular person. This is kind of pointing towards the monotheistic
Mhm.
stance we have today. With modern Christians, it's the Trinity. They'll use this as proof text of the Trinity. We know there's one God, but look at this. Genesis 1:26 is "let us." Oh, there's Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost. In Latter-day Saint tradition, we might look at God the Father and Jesus, and maybe even some of us were involved. I think we kind of get this somewhat right into being more of a divine council.
Mhm.
Adam was involved. Others could be involved. So I think that's kind of cool that at times Latter-day Saint tradition does align better with the Old Testament, but not
Mhm.
always. We have to
Mhm.
accept that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it depends on what I guess your upbringing is, what you've been taught. When you read that,
Yeah.
you'll come to different conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. This is kind of the same issue I was just talking about, is it can be subject to a number of different interpretations, right?
Right. And this is one of my favorites because I remember distinctly reading this, like, again, when I was in my early 20s, reading the Bible. Genesis 6:2 says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And I knew what that meant intuitively, I think, but also just in case I didn't, there's a chapter header that says that the sons of God are like humans like us, and they were righteous people, and they saw daughters of men who were not righteous people, and they taught them to worship gods other than Jehovah. They led them astray and said, "Here, have some coffee." Who knows what they asked them to do, and everything went to heck because of that.
I think they enticed them to play with playing cards, probably,
That
John.
too. Yeah. So, that's how I understood it. And I think that's how most of us understand it today. And I had a discussion with my sister on this. She's a Eastern Orthodox, and
Mm,
they understand it that some angels came down and
right,
had sex with women, and God was upset at that because angels are not supposed to do that stuff.
right.
But
That's like
here,
the
this is
idea of the Nephilim, I think, right?
yeah, exactly. And what we see here in Genesis 6:2 is closer to what you would get with Zeus and Hera, and uh, Zeus would have sex with a female human, and you would get a Hercules out of it.
Right.
And you see that later, in that they say that the offspring of these sons of God and daughters of men are warriors of the past of great renown, or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what's really going on. But again, when I first read that, farthest thing from my mind.
Right.
And this one I think applies to the modern. This example applies to our modern discussion of like LGBTQ issues.
Mhm.
In the book of Jude, Jude talks about people being like Sodom and Gomorrah, going after strange flesh. And I'm pretty sure when I've read that in the past, I thought, oh, they're talking about homosexuality there. But when you think about it, hey, another man is not strange flesh to me. We're like more similar than women we are to women. But thanks to Dan McClellan, I listening to some of his videos, which I highly recommend people do. He explains how they understood these the Sodom and Gomorrah, what was happening back then differently than we do today. And I think if you read the text is pretty clear that these are angels, or maybe even sons of God in an earlier tradition, but these are
Right.
angels that are visiting Abraham and Lot, giving
Right.
them guidance from God to help them. And by not only wanting to gang rape and abuse them, which was really bad in itself, they were interested in like, what's it like to do this to an angel? I don't know, guys. I'm kind of guessing at what maybe Jude thinks there, but it's clearly not testifying against homosexual sex. It's really testifying against sex with angels in some sense. And I shouldn't say that necessarily. That's what Jude is saying it is. The Genesis author may have something different in mind when he talked about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right, which is another one of these interesting, I guess, methodological points about this collective witness idea is it's almost like it's just aggregating different folks' opinions, right? So the way you just put it, I think, is a good one, John. This is just Jude's interpretation of an original story that was written by, we really don't know who, that makes its way into the Genesis account. And I think that's one of the big struggles is, how do you know what actually counts as a witness versus just an interpretation? I remember my last calling when I was active in the church was I taught all 4 years of gospel doctrine. And I remember one of the years, what's that?
I said, I'm jealous. That sounds like fun, actually.
Oh, it was a blast. I absolutely loved it. So I was able to teach through all 4 of the standard works. And I remember when we were doing the Book of Mormon year, Alma, in the book of Alma has very strong opinions about the idea of hell and the resurrection. And there really isn't anything in Alma that indicates there's any type of post-mortal spirit world experience like Latter-day Saints believe today. And I remember there was this older member who was like absolutely insistent that like when this life is over, because that's what it says in Alma, that is the end of your chance to repent. And he was like distracting from the entire lesson because he was just hyper focused on what Alma says. And ironically, since I'm critiquing Jacob's collective witness today, or collective witness model today, one of the things I pointed him to is this exact same idea. Like, we have to take what Alma said and try and square it or reconcile it with the other things that we know that are all throughout Scripture. And so since he doesn't say anything explicitly against a post-mortal, spirit world experience like Mormons believe today, that we can reconcile these things. But it's just an interesting real world example of the exact problem I think you're highlighting here, which is everybody has their own interpretive lens and everybody is negotiating with the text, to borrow a phrase from, you've mentioned him a few times, Dan McClellan.
Yeah. I think proof texting is another word for it. We have an idea, we see a text that vibes with it, and we just say, that's it. It's right there.
Right.
All right. This next example, I got another one from Jude, another one from the Book of Mormon. So Jude has this wonderful verse. It says, and of some have compassion, making a difference. I mean, it's real beautiful the way it intuitively read to me, and I think to others as well. It's like, hey, you should have compassion on some people. I can't maybe do it to the whole world, but I can choose some people, have compassion on them, and make sure that I make a difference in their lives. Right. It could testify against thoughts and prayers when something bad happens. Right. You should actually make a difference. Don't just think and pray about it. Help people. Right. So that's the way it's always been understood. But as again, you find out that you look at other versions of like the New King James Version, instead of differences, it says making a distinction, which isn't quite as fun because it says, hey, have compassion on some people, but pick and choose. Right. Maybe you don't have compassion on that guy. You can't help him. He's done. Right. Homeless people, select them out. They deserve that. Right. There's all sorts of weird ways you can go with distinction, but that is actually closer to maybe what the King James translators meant, and is closer to what the textual tradition they were using meant. Now, interestingly, I looked at, what did other Bible translations say? And there's this great tool called Bible Hub where you can look up a verse and find and list all the different translations. I found that most modern translations have something very different than any of this. And it says something like, have compassion on those who doubt. What? Because they go off of an older scriptural tradition. And there's another family of texts that don't go in this direction at all. Right. And I tried to cheat and go to ChatGPT and say, what is going on here? And it said something about Byzantine tradition made it into what you see here. So the way we read it might be great, but the way it's really meant is not so great. But the whole thing is probably kind of corrupted to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
The other one, 2 Nephi 25:23, for we know it is by grace that we are saved after all we can do. And, this one, I heard a talk in sacrament meeting where just recently, where a member of the High Council was interpreting this the traditional way, but trying to downplay it and trying to make it less like maybe all we can do is just come to church, right? And afterwards I told him, you know what that verse really means? If you look at how that verse is used in the past, it always means despite all you can do. Like after isn't saying, here you're this, now you're that, right? This verse, then that. It's just really saying, hey, you tried it, despite of all the things you're trying to do, you can't save yourself. And so,
Right. I always kind of
interestingly,
understood it as like the interesting tension between, I can't remember which letter of Paul it's in, but he uses this analogy of running a race so that you may win the prize, but then it ends by basically saying, but let him use wisdom, for it is not requisite that a man run faster than he has strength, something to that effect. And I've always kind of understood the passage in 2 Nephi the same way, not to be used to shame people or say that you're not doing enough, but to actually kind of live in this tension of like, how much is enough? I feel like maybe part of the Christian experiment or experience is to legitimately wonder, to go back to the way you read that verse in Jude, if we are doing enough to make a difference for other people, while also recognizing that we're humans and we have limitations, right? Like it's almost like the idea of, if someone asks for your cloak, give him your coat also, that Jesus talks about. Well, you can only do that so many times before you don't have either left anymore, right? And I think there's a legitimate kind of paradox that people have to work out of like, how much effort it is enough. I don't know. I think the point of all of those passages is that the onus is put on the person who's making the sacrifice, who's doing the effort. Only they can really tell you what's enough.
Nice. I like that. All right. Problem number 4 is scriptural errancy as opposed to scriptural inerrancy. I think we as Latter-day Saints can have an easier time accepting this. I think one of the problems we're dealing with, though, is we have this idea that, sure, the scripture is inerrant and it has to be, or is errant. It has to be translated correctly, but we have the JST to fix all that stuff.
Right.
Now, you get some Latter-day Saints might think about that, like, no, I don't think Joseph Smith got to everything, but that's kind of how our manuals work.
Right.
And that's a problem. So anyway, I split this into 3 categories. We have editing issues. So like editors will add stuff. For example, in Matthew 5:22, somewhat famously, we have a verse that says, whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be, what does it say?
Liable to judgment.
Liable to judgment. It's a little small on my screen. So yeah, you can be judged for being angry at other people, but if you have a cause, you're off the hook. Now, JST fixes this, and it's not really clear why. We can't get into Joseph Smith's mind. He could have just felt like, I don't like this, and he took it out, because I could see how it's controversial. We also know he had access to a Bible commentary that I don't know the name off the top of my head.
Adam Clark.
Adam Clark, that's right. That said, hey, this doesn't exist in earlier manuscripts. So he may have known that too. But either way, I feel it was inspired for him to take it out, right? It doesn't belong there. But that's just one thing that we know of. And that's another thing you need to keep in mind. The errors that editors put into the Bible, we only know the ones that we know of. We don't know the ones that we don't know of. And that's something we should always consider. Right. And so this is kind of a fun little picture of a Greek manuscript where a scribe just wrote in the sidebar there or in the margin without a cause, just to make sure that it got copied correctly, quote unquote, correctly the next time. We also have translation issues, and I actually brought this one up in church, and some people liked it, and at least anybody who complained didn't complain to me personally. But in the Hebrew, in Isaiah 7:14, the word alma is used, young woman. And this is the famous verse that Matthew borrows where it says, and and behold, a virgin shall conceive.
Right.
Right? That's what we get in our King James versions. And in the Hebrew, the word is actually young woman. And that got translated into the Greek Septuagint. Now, the Greek Septuagint is a version of the Old Testament put into Greek and most Christians back then, in early Christianity, they read the Greek version because they were Greek speakers.
Right.
This is not the apostles and Jesus. They're I think Aramaic.
Right.
But most of the Christians, Paul and everybody at that time, they were reading in Greek. So Matthew was probably reading in Greek, and he saw this word parthenos, which and you know how words are, they can mean more than one thing. They can cover a broader category than just one thing. Parthenos apparently can be used to mean virgin, can also be used to mean just a young woman. But whatever it was, I think to Matthew, he saw that word, and to him, he interpreted it as virgin. And that's not lying. I don't think he was being surreptitious or anything. And he may have, but to him, it may have been really clear that that's what Parthenos meant, was virgin. And so in the Latin text, you get the word for virgin, and there's no ambiguity between virgin and a young woman or a maiden.
Right.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I
Matthew,
like this.
Yeah.
I like this particular example because actually, it was probably about a year ago. I did an episode looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls and basically comparing the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Book of Mormon's claimed brass plates. And this is one of the things that I pointed out is when the Book of Mormon captures Isaiah 7:14 in the Book of Mormon, it always translates it as virgin, when what we would expect based on the brass plates being copied into the Book of Mormon is we would expect actually this word Alma, the young woman, without reference to virginity, right? Just a young woman. That's what we would expect in the Book of Mormon's brass plates version, but that isn't what we see captured. Instead, we see the King James version basically captured in the Book of Mormon's capturing of Isaiah.
Right. And what may be happening in the Book of Mormon is the same thing that is happening on my third category of harmonization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Isaiah 7:14, and you go to our Christian Bibles, it says, behold, the virgin shall conceive. But I go to my Jewish Bibles, and it says, behold, the young woman shall conceive.
Right.
If you go to the NRSV UE, which is a more scholarly Bible, it says, the young woman shall conceive. Or it actually says, look, the young woman is with child. She's actually already pregnant. Right. Mary is not pregnant yet. So NRSV UE is kind of a killjoy in that sense. It just, oh man, I thought this was about Mary. It's about a woman living there. Who knows? Isaiah's walking right by her. He says, hey, you see that woman there? She's going to conceive. Oh, or she's going to have a baby. She's already pregnant. So yeah, most Christian Bibles just change it for us so that we don't have any cognitive dissonance over Matthew saying it differently than Isaiah said it.
Right.
And there's no reason to do that other than dogma.
Right.
All right. Bunch of other examples. Some places in the Old Testament, God's is changed to Israel. Mm-hmm. That was probably done long before our time. Go ahead, go to the next one. Mm-hmm. There's also angels. God's is changed to angels. I don't know enough to say exactly what's going on there, but I think angels are another type of divine being that may be meant to take the place of the sons of God. Mm-hmm. But that also supports monotheism. There's no chance that an angel, as a son of God, could inherit his father's position. Mm. And this is one of my favorites, the long endings of Mark. So Mark is known to be the very first gospel written, probably around 70 CE, give or take. Mm-hmm. And it ended with Mary Magdalene, and I think it was Mary, the mother of Jesus, going to the tomb. They're wondering how they're going to get the tomb open, and they find that the tomb is already open. This big stone is rolled away. They talk to a messenger inside, and he says, "Oh, he's not here." The messenger's an angel, and they're like, "Whoa, what's going on?" He says, "Hey, he's going to come back. He's going to go and meet the meet up with Peter at another location.
Right.
That escapes me at the moment. And the angel tells him, go tell Peter and others to meet Jesus there. And they're afraid, and then they just don't tell anybody.
Right.
Oh, what? They didn't tell anyone? What? You can't end like that. I mean, maybe an apologist would say that half was cut off or lost somehow, which is not impossible. But it could also be that Mark doesn't know of a lot of witnesses. And he's saying, well, there were witnesses. They just were too afraid to talk about it.
Right.
So there's two long endings, and one they call an intermediate ending. And that ending, it just says that the two Marys went and told some friends of Peter's, and they sent the message to Peter. And that's how he hooked up with Jesus later. The longer ending, the very long one, basically takes a synopsis of the resurrection of Christ from the three other Gospels, combines them together, and sticks it at the ending of Mark.
Right.
And if you read them, you can tell. It's like, oh, that's from John, that's from Luke, that's from Matthew. And they came later. So somebody long after the Gospels were written went back and edited Mark so that it would jive with the other Gospels.
Right.
The women caught in adultery. This is one of many people, it's our favorite gospel story.
This was my personal, so this is found in John 8, and this was my personal favorite story to use to explain the character of Jesus Christ. Like, I thought it was just a perfect encapsulation of the way that he wrestled with the law and balanced justice and mercy. And yes, I was very disappointed in my faith crisis to learn that this is a story that is not present in the earliest manuscripts, and is almost certainly based on, my understanding is like based on the difference in the way it was composed. When we look at the earliest manuscripts, is almost certainly a later interpolation. Again, does that mean that it didn't happen? Not necessarily, but does it mean that we have a good reason to believe that it did in the same way that we do, like the parts of the Gospel of John that date back to the earliest manuscripts? I think everyone would just have to answer the question as no, right?
Right. I guess in my mind, I'd say just given the evidence, I'd have to say this almost certainly did not happen.
Right.
However, there could be another tradition where that had this story in it. There could be, we know there's lots of other Gospels that were written.
Right.
Most Bible scholars would say they were left out, probably for good reason. But that doesn't mean that ancient Christians drew the line at the right spot and got the perfect Gospels in and the bad ones out.
Right.
But they were selective. And however, something may have happened where a scribe knew of this story, and they think maybe he wrote it in the margin. They said, oh, we're talking about this topic in John. I remember a story like that, and they wrote it in the side. And then someone else saw that and thought, oh, he wrote this in the margin. He must have meant to put it in. And so it got put in, and now it's there forever. That's one story I've heard of how it came about. But however this story came about, it could be rooted in truth somehow. We just can't know. But even if it's not, and I would make this point to Latter-day Saints, like in the case of that verse in Jude, and in this case as well, where you have something good like have compassion, make a difference, or you have the woman caught in adultery and maybe it's a fake made up story. Just because some rando put it in there doesn't mean it doesn't have value, that you can still learn a valuable lesson from it. It doesn't have to be original, right?
Right.
A child can prophesy, and maybe that scribe, he didn't write something bad. Maybe he wrote something good in there, and we can roll with that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll gloss over this. Isaiah and Jeremiah have been added to extensively. We have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah. They call it Deutero-Isaiah. And I think scholars debate whether there's a Trideo-Isaiah, however you say it.
Yeah, I think Trido.
Trido. What I like about that is at least we know that there is a real Isaiah who wrote the first, I think, 29 chapters or so. But you can tell they're different because Isaiah at the beginning seems to be working in a very different political situation than Isaiah in the second half.
Right.
It would be like this, where maybe you're reading Joseph Smith, and all of a sudden, in this Joseph Smith sermon, he starts talking about what to do about gay marriage.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, wait a minute, that's okay. Maybe he could have, but that's not a problem until many years later.
Right.
200 years later, that's an issue people are talking about. So,
right.
That's how you can kind of feel some of these things out. In Jeremiah, there's a fun one where some of the verses are kind of copies of each other. One famous one that I looked at recently was, the idea of Israelites sacrificing their children to Molech or other gods like Baal. And the first time that verse is written down, it says that they did this in a house called by the Lord's name. But in the next version, that's taken out, because no way Israelites would actually mistakenly do this in a house called by the Lord's name. And also the Lord says, I didn't command this. Neither did it come into my mind, very defensive. But if you look at these three, you can see how they've been edited. They're edited versions of each other that try to distance Yahweh from this child sacrifice that people were doing.
Right.
All right. And definitely my favorite here is Romans 16:7. And you can look at modern translations in Bible Gateway, line them all up, and they all have differences. This is talking about what I think we know today as a female apostle. Paul makes just kind of a passing mention to some in Romans to her, saying, salute Andronicus and Junia, who are of note among the apostles. So the King James Version actually gets this pretty right. And scholars have looked back at that name Junia, and they've been able to find versions of it, and they all are referring to a female. And if you're thinking, well, it could be Junius, as some Bible translations put it, there's no Juniuses in existence that scholars have found. That's just not a man's name. Maybe there's somebody somewhere. And I'm sure if he's ever found, that'll be used as ammo. But the English Standard Version, which is known to be very patriarchal, does keep Junia. I think they recognize that Junia has to be a female name, but they changed the word among to two. So these are people that the apostles have special understanding of, or that they really appreciate the work they've done. They don't have that apostolic mantle. Another version changes Junia to Junius. And I saw a Latter-day Saint influencer recently post something about the apostasy. And they said, look, there's these other apostles, Andronicus and Junius, and this person should know better. And so I called them on it, and they gave me a quote from Got Questions about the Bible, and it's from this very apologetic source. And so I posted a Dan McClellan video, and they didn't respond to that. Anyway, because you can't.
One of the things I'm really struck by with those examples is that Jacob's model basically operates from this assumption that if we find the same teaching repeated over time through multiple different scriptural books, that's going to increase the weighting of this collective witness. But I think one of the things you're demonstrating, and that I understand from my study of critical biblical scholarship, is that many times that consistency, which again, then Jacob treats as further evidence of a collective witness, can often be the result of redaction, of editing, of reinterpretation, of renegotiation. And I think that's kind of the point here, right? Is that these scriptures are not necessarily able to be viewed as independent as witnesses, as Jacob's model presumes. Is that kind of the takeaway from this particular problem?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like if you read Romans 16:7, you're like reading Junius in there, and you're thinking it's a man, that there's nothing to possibly disturb the collective witness model for you. But if it's a female, well, maybe he misspoke. You can use the collective witness model and say you can't have female prophets. You can erase it.
Right.
So it's kind of like you can choose what you want in that case.
Right.
All right.
Okay,
And I
over
won't
to
read.
this. Yeah.
I won't read through all these, but I did read through Isaiah recently in my Jewish study Bible, and it was wonderful. And I think Dan McClellan also talked about this verse being mistranslated, and I was kind of curious to really understand what's going on here. And apparently, nobody knows how to translate it. These are 5
Which is so funny
translations
because
with 5 different meanings.
This is such a commonly used scriptural phrase, so it's funny to me
Yes.
that there's no real clear way to understand it.
Right, and I still use it because I think it's true to use it the way Nephi used it.
Sure.
I think it works, and I think there's a case to be made that Isaiah intended that, but that can't be the only thing he intended. It's not clear who's saying this. Is Isaiah saying this to prophets he considers drunk, or are the drunken prophets saying it to Isaiah? Right? And we don't know if it's meant to be gibberish, or is the gibberish kind of poetic and he throws in words that have meaning and making them sound gibberish, right? There's all over the place translations of this, and I think it's a great exercise to look it up. And I even talked to my wife about this, and I came up with my own versions that I thought were kind of clever. to I don't know, it's and I think it's not just this verse. There's a lot of verses that, especially in the book of Job, I've heard scholars say we try hard, but we still don't know how to translate a lot of it.
Interesting.
All right, next problem, number 5, is repetition or lack thereof. So sometimes something can be very controversial, and so it gets brought up a lot, like worshiping other gods in the Old Testament. You don't get a lot of that today. We may replace gods with something like worldly stuff, right? I mean, marriage and family issues today are the controversy, so they get mentioned a lot. I think Jim Bennett said that maybe that's coming from a place of weakness. If you keep repeating something over and over again, maybe it's just because it's controversial and this is where you stand now, so you say it a lot. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's part of the collective witness. Tradition, Heavenly Mother, that's not a tradition that we see anywhere in Scripture, as far as I can tell. We do have Asherah in the Old Testament. She's casted there as a goddess you're not supposed to worship.
Right.
And it's really bad.
As like a consort to El or Elohim.
The biblical scholarship and the archaeology tell us that many Israelites believe she was, I'll use Heavenly Mother in quotes. They didn't believe that we were literal sons and daughters of God back then, but she was definitely the wife of Yahweh in a lot of, I guess, in the ancient tradition. But nowadays, we know of her. I think that it's not, you'll have to correct me if it is in any of our scriptures somewhere, but I don't think it is. I think it's something Joseph Smith taught, but she's too sacred to talk about. So it's kind of like, we don't really repeat her, right? There's a lack of repetition. So it's kind of mysterious. Like, do we know anything? Can we know anything? Since we don't talk about it much, we got to put her in the ghost category. We don't really know much, and it's going to stay that way. Boundary maintenance, I think, is a good one, right? We talk a lot about the word of wisdom. There are things that, I guess, make a dividing line between us and others. And it's not really that important that people don't drink coffee. This is kind of my opinion on the word of wisdom, but I think there's definitely health concerns there. Some of them most of them I think are valid. Some of them I think are kind of invalid. But overall, I think we're going to keep not drinking coffee for a very long time. And that's because I think it's a boundary maintenance marker.
Right.
We can also look at faith versus work, kind of is the same role.
One of the things I was very surprised by with your example of the word of wisdom, and to be clear, this is on me, is I did not actually read the full Doctrine and Covenants 89 where the word of wisdom is contained until I was on my mission. I just had always read like the very specific verses, and you kind of grow up understanding what the word of wisdom means. And lo and behold, when I went to actually read Doctrine and Covenants 89, I was so shocked to find that it literally starts by saying that it is not given as a commandment, that it's given basically as advice. And I think that kind of bolsters what you're saying, that I really don't think, even as a believer, I guess I'll put my believing hat on again. I never thought that, following the word of wisdom to the exact letter of it was what was important. It was more the principle behind it. The word of wisdom was just the way that principle was being expressed by Joseph Smith through Joseph Smith's understanding of that principle.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
All right. And then our witnesses are dependent on one another. I
Right.
think a great example of this is how Matthew and Luke, they're not just inspired by Mark. They definitely copy.
Right.
If you were to get, turn in as an assignment or a paper to a professor in college, Mark and Matthew and Luke would get expelled for, cheating. They plagiarized Mark.
Mhm.
We won't go over that, but could the author of Matthew and Luke have come to different conclusions, but they kept the ones Mark had because that was just the tradition, right?
Right.
You don't change it too much. You can add some decoration to it, but there's a lot of things that maybe they would have done differently, I think, if they hadn't just copied. And John definitely, I think they did not copy. They're inspired by it, but they definitely go into a different direction in a lot of ways, especially with pointing out the divinity of Jesus Christ. They go above and beyond.
Right.
So dependent witnesses, I already mentioned, scriptural texts copy and echo each other. We see that in the Book of Mormon. The Gospels leverage the Old Testament. And Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist, points out that, hey, just because, if somebody who we're a friend with or is in our group judges something in a positive or negative manner, we're just going to do the same. It's this desire we all have to be socially cohesive. We want our neighbor, the person next to us, to defend us if something bad happens, and maybe they won't do that if they think that we think differently.
Right. And one of the things I appreciate about your inclusion of some of Jonathan Haidt's ideas here is I feel like oftentimes, from my point of view, the critical or skeptical perspective is strawmanned and not understood, where people basically see my position and think that I'm saying that if I don't have sufficient reason to trust in I'll just use the accounts of the Gospels as my example here. If I don't think I have sufficient reason to trust in the accounts of the Gospels, it's because I believe Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all trying to mislead people. And I think one of the things that Jonathan Haidt's work on psychology teaches us is everyone can be trying to accurately describe their experience. And there are natural cognitive biases we have that have to play into how we evaluate the evidence. That's the way I look at it. So it's not necessarily saying there was any ill intent. It's just recognizing the way that human psychology works and the limitations of human psychology.
Yeah, and not to deviate too much, that's one of my big criticisms of, I guess, the anti-Mormon podcasts and certain people out there. I mean, you can be a member of the church or not a member of the church. You can think it's true, you can think it's not. But if you're always assuming ill intent, something that could be just lack of knowledge or ineptitude becomes lies all the time, and everything has an ulterior, nasty motive, I just don't listen to you. I just don't very much. I don't feel edified or like I'm understanding anything better.
Yeah, I would actually say that for me, that's kind of the demarcating line between what a true anti-Mormon is if you really believe that there is nothing good that can come out of this system, if you really believe that the people running it have ill intent from start to finish, that they're knowing frauds, I think that's very naive. It's a very naive take. It's basically, I view it as having the same level of fundamentalism as some very simplistic believing Mormons, only it's the flip side of the coin, right? It's like being Mormon in reverse is the way I would put it. Being like a fundamentalist Mormon in reverse, rather than moving past the system, whatever, obviously recognizing that you and I have come to different places on that, but I just don't see that as reconcilable with the evidence. I think even if we get to just the question of Joseph Smith and get away from contemporary leaders, I think there are definitely instances I could point to, specific stories where I do think Joseph Smith lied or misrepresented things. Does that mean that I believe he was a knowing fraud from the beginning? No, I don't think it's that simple, actually. I think there are far too many instances where I could point to Joseph Smith's good intentions or sincere efforts. And that often gets me into hot water with a lot of other ex-Mormons for what it's worth. So,
well, good for you. But I will say that I agree that there are times perhaps, and I have my own opinions on some places where I think prophets or apostles may have lied, and I don't like it. But I think for the most part, I don't come to that conclusion. And it's hard for me to come to that conclusion without good evidence, right?
Sure.
All right, worldview preservation and cognitive dissonance avoidance, right? No one likes thinking of an idea that goes against the way you think the world works, right? It's hard to change your glasses, so to speak.
Exactly.
And I'll just leave it at that, unless you have anything to add.
No.
Problem number 7, projection. I would highly recommend a YouTube video by Britt Hartley, where she talks about Republican and Democrat Jesus. It's really good. But I think it's very true that, we look at the stories of Jesus and we apply them to our moral values.
Right.
And I think what's the old saying? It goes something like this. This time I'll remember it. God made man in his own image, and man has returned the favor ever since. Right. We just, if you're a CEO of a company, you feel like Jesus is telling you that's what you're supposed to do. You look at the parable of the talents, you're like, I'm investing and making, taking my talents, I'm making more. Right. You got prosperity gospel, you got liberation theology. And of course, Jesus is all for equality in some people's minds. Yeah. I don't think we need to go into this too deeply.
No, I think it just connects with what we talked about earlier with the Genesis account, right? Like these stories, these archetypes, including Jesus, if you view him as a literary character, as an archetype, are vague enough. There's enough threads for people to interpret to the way that they already kind of see the world. And I think that's one of the things that we just kind of have to recognize about these texts, is that they don't speak for themselves. And so people pick and choose the parts. And when I say pick and choose, I don't even mean that this is happening consciously. Like you talked about on the last slide, one of the things we learned from Jonathan Haidt's work, right, is that our brains crave narrative closure. They like simple answers. And so there's nothing aside from normal human psychology working behind the scenes to kind of get to this level of projection, is all I would say.
Absolutely. All right. This last one I thought of, I call it consensus blindness. I think this is where you might see something in scriptures or some prophet says it, and you just kind of ignore it, or you don't see how it fits at all into your worldview or way of thinking. And I came up with like 3 examples. The first one is Isaiah 5:8. It reads, "Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field until there is room for no one, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land." Okay, that belongs to a culture a long time ago. Is very agrarian. You have maybe think of a lot of people have farms. Your farm does well, your neighbor's does not, so you buy them out. Or maybe you lend him money and he becomes your slave, but you start to grow bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden you realize you're alone. You don't have any peers around you. Who's left to fight the wars and defend the nation if they've all had to flee to Moab or Edom because, hey, you got too rich and you forced everyone out. So that's a big problem for Isaiah. And now how do we apply that today? I think I love Nephi's insight that we need to apply the scriptures to ourselves, and including Isaiah. And I think this is a great example where we can do that and say, well, maybe we don't have this exact problem. And I think Dave Ramsey said something that exemplifies this when he was asked if he was greedy for owning lots of houses, or if people who bought up like investment houses buy up a lot of properties, this raises the cost for other people.
Right.
And so Ramsey was asked this, if that's wrong. And he says, well, I don't know, 15 to 20 houses, but I don't own anything. I'm a Christian, and that means God owns it, and I'm managing it for him. gobsmacked. I mean, the hubris there is just awful. If anyone's a good Christian, they know that they're going to make mistakes and they're not going to manage it right. But the way I would apply Isaiah 5:8 to this buying up a bunch of houses is maybe even though you buy up a bunch of houses, people still live in them. They're renters.
Mhm.
So you're not pushing people out of the land, but you are pushing people out of the ability to own something that can improve their net worth and make them wealthy like you are. You start
Right.
creating a greater and greater separation between the wealthy and the poor as more people are priced out of the market. And so
Right.
I would say you could totally look past this as not being applicable to us because it belongs to another culture, another place and time. But I think it has something very important to say if you read it and apply it to ourselves.
Mhm.
Exodus 22:25 says, if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you shall not deal with them as a creditor. You shall not exact interest from them. Obviously, I haven't heard any of the brethren say don't charge interest. I don't know where else in the Bible it says that. But when you read it, you think about what's the problem it's trying to solve, right? People are being charged. It could be interest of 5%, nothing crazy. But clearly the author of Exodus wants poor people to be cut a break, right?
Mhm.
Maybe we don't in the United States say, oh, okay, if you make less than 40 or 50,000 a year, you don't have to pay interest. I doubt we'll do
Mhm.
anything that silly, and I think it would be silly. But why not give a break to student loan debtors? Yeah, maybe they made a mistake. They got a degree in underwater basket weaving. They can't get a job with it. They can't pay back the $150,000. It's really tough. Cut them a break. I think that's the
Mhm.
spirit of Exodus. And I think even though it's kind of hidden under this consensus blindness, I think it can have something to do for us today. And finally, female prophets. Deborah is a famous one. I know my wife has been focusing on her with our daughters. She's an example that, women can do great things, that people can go to a woman for advice and help and to be closer to God. And she serves as kind of like Alma does in the Book of Mormon, advising Barak on, okay, you can win in the battlefield if you do this. And he's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, how do I trust you? You can trust me because I'm going to go with you like a good leader does. And so she's got an amazing story, but there's also Huldah. And I honestly didn't learn about her until I was studying for this interview that we're doing.
Mhm.
She's right there in the book of, getting older, can't remember the book, but it's King Josiah. Somebody finds in the temple these writings hidden in the wall. And they're like, what do we do with these writings? Oh, go to the prophet. Well, who's the prophet? Huldah, a female. Hey, what does this mean? What should we do? I mean, this is like Russell M. Nelson and Dallin H. Oaks today, right? They
Mhm.
use Huldah just like we would use a modern prophet.
And
So definitely
it looks like
something
she
in there.
serves that it looks like she serves that role and is mentioned in both Second Kings and Second Chronicles. So not even in just one
Oh, there's two
book.
witnesses then. Although
Yeah,
they probably
exactly.
copied. so yeah. I think this consensus blindness, there's some gems out there, but we can ignore them and not apply them if we're not careful.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about this slide that's interesting to me is everything you said is interesting, but the one I have an additional thought on is the verse in Exodus 22. I've often thought about, since the Hebrew Bible really only has the one mention about homosexuality or homosexual relationships that we've talked about, and people can interpret those differently, the verse in Leviticus. I just have often been struck by how inconsistent the two verses are treated, right? We have this one line in Exodus 22 about not extracting interest, and nobody is fighting for their religious freedom to not be charged interest or to not charge interest. Yet we
Mhm.
see that, I would say bigotry against LGBTQ people is treated as a prime issue for religious freedom. And it's just that inconsistency that is very interesting to me.
Right. No, it is indeed. All right, so I'm going to reweight things here. If you recall the original
Mhm.
graphic I had, you just had reason, spirit, intuition, collective witness. Given these 8 problems, I think that the collective witness is clouded extensively by what we would call our spirit and intuition and outside influences.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of collective witness I think we're actually capable of doing, unfortunately. I didn't
Right.
erase it completely because I think it does matter. And I think if you ask the right questions, it can work.
Sure.
I just think it's a distraction to think you're actually doing it most of the time.
Well, and to that point, John, I think one of the things I've been struck by as I've listened to Jacob talk about this theory is I've never actually seen him apply it. I've never seen him actually sit down and sketch out what the collective witness is. Like how you had that slide where you had, you know, the prophets that had spoken to an issue, the vast majority of them were silent on an issue. I just feel like it's a useful rhetorical tool that Jacob then uses to cherry pick
Oh
from
yeah,
the sources that already agree with him
it's a
rather
hot
than
gotcha.
rather than to actually do the exercise. Like if you're going to do this methodology, then actually do it. Actually sketch out the collective witness and see what it says. But I've never actually seen that work been done.
Right. And I will say quickly that in my line of work, and I'm sure in a lot of other lines of work, you can put together what they call like a decision matrix,
Right.
where you put down, here's all the things that are important to me, and here's how I might weight those things.
Right.
Now, usually when I do this at work, they can get rather complicated, and you can fudge the weightings.
Mhm.
And we're all kind of aware of this. Like you can put down, well, I think this is that important, that's this important, and you get to the bottom of it. It says after you're done filling out, oh, it says we should do this. Yeah, but we know we really want to do that. I think we find those decision matrices helpful because they can
Mhm.
bring up ideas we might overlook, and they might really reject things we don't want. But ultimately, we'll override them if our gut says to go with something else.
Right.
We really do.
Right.
All right, now we're getting into reason, and I hope I do this one justice. So Jacob says, and I'll quote him, some think mankind can reason their way to truth, and that's largely true. But any study of the philosophical limits of reason will help you realize it's not a comprehensive tool. I actually agree with him there. Especially in matters of morality and ethics. I agree with that also.
Yeah, that's
Also, there's
basically
a
referencing David Hume's idea that you can't get an
right.
ought from an is. Yeah.
Yep. Also, there is a good case to be made that our rational facilities are actually built on deeper intuitions that prompt us to value consistency and truth. So rationality ultimately is very likely rooted in something more spiritual. So I'll add to that. I think he's kind of on the right track. He does mention that reason's important, but I think what he's trying to explain here is, but you also need the collective witness of prophets, and you also need the intuition or the spirit to be there, because reason alone won't work. Well, I think he's getting kind of close, but he's not quite there. What actually is happening is that reason's not independent. It's actually being driven by the spirit. So it's not it's almost not really a separate thing. Like I told you before, you can do those risk assessments, but sometimes you just override it. I said risk assessment, but decision matrix. Sometimes you can override them just if your gut feels different and your team at work wants to do something else, and you all agree to it, and then that's what happens, even if if it got the second or the third place score. So I think he's almost there, but he misses the point, and it's not that the others need to counterbalance; it's that the others influence very greatly what your reason's going to do.
Yeah, and the way I guess I'll just give my perspective on this. I would agree with the first two of these sentences and could probably talk about it for about 10 minutes. But I guess I'll just say I agree with the idea that reason is not a comprehensive tool, but I don't really see a reason, pun intended, to interject something beyond reason for questions that reason can answer. I think, for me, and we could have a whole interesting discussion about just what someone's
Yeah.
theory of truth is. For me, I subscribe to what's called the correspondence theory of truth, which basically means that truth is that which corresponds to reality, right? That truth is basically an accurate description of the reality that we can encounter. And in my view, reason is one tool that can get us there. It is not, as Jacob says here, that I agree with, a comprehensive tool that can answer all questions for us. But in the same way, I wouldn't criticize a screwdriver for its inability to be used as a hammer, I don't think that's really a limitation of reason, except in like the most technical sense. It's just we have to recognize what uses, or I'm sorry, we have to recognize what categories reason can and cannot be used to help us answer.
Right. I think we also have to recognize that, like in a correspondence, like what thoughts, what reasons correspond to what's really out there. Well, what's really out there is a culture we live in, right? What's really out there is what our parents have taught us. There's a lot of things besides just physics we're doing with reason, and we all kind of swim in different environments sometimes where we are. How do I put this? We're using correspondence from our thoughts to different things, right? Like William James, I think, is the one who put it this way. We get our beliefs from things that have value, that pay us back. And I think by that, even our reason, the concepts we come up with our minds, they may not correspond. Things in my mind that may not and probably don't correspond to your reality, and things in your mind that you reasoned out as perfectly legit don't correspond to mine. Right. I don't know if that
based
makes
on
sense.
our
I think it's
based on our like based on like
yeah,
our different experiences, you're saying.
Right. Like I know you've had an experience with the church is very different than mine. I haven't gone through your Mormon stories videos yet. They're very long. But from what I do know of it, I can see how having that experience would make leaving the church very rational and logical thing. And the fact that you gave me those reasons, or that I've seen them being given, I actually empathize with that deeply. And I'm actually kind of hurt and saddened that the church didn't do a better job with this. Right. But I'm still not convinced that it's like, oh, I'm leaving, I'm out. Right. It doesn't even come near to that. But for you, I can see how I can both rationally come up with something different, but we just have different experiences.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a David Hume quote that I really, this quote really, changed my life almost. It really made me doubt that I'm really thinking anything correctly at all. He says, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. 'Tis not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger. Right? Take a psychopath who has maybe godlike powers, and he scratches his finger and it really hurts. And he's like, oh gosh, if I destroy the whole world, that will include me and my finger, and I won't have to feel this pain anymore. How can you ration to him to do it? Say, yeah, but all these people live here. You can pull out like, Kantian reason. You can pull out utilitarianism. Look at all the people you're hurting. He's like, well, I don't care. If he doesn't care, he can destroy the whole world to prevent the pain in his finger. So I think Hume's right about that. Luckily, human beings were pretty close to each other in our ability to empathize and understand and feel one another's pain, that we wouldn't go that far. But I think he's right.
Yeah, I think he's right in the sense that we can't just use reason purely to arrive at moral judgments. I think where, at least my personal perspective, is if we can agree on what the goal is. So you gave a few like different ways we could analyze moral questions, utilitarianism, and there's different strains of utilitarianism. We could look at deontology, which is Kant's idea of like the categorical imperative, right? Yeah. I feel like once we agree on an assumption, which is like what type of moral judgment are we doing? Are we doing a variety, or are we like balancing a variety of different approaches? That I do feel like we can use reason to arrive at more sound judgments. So I would push back a little bit on Hume in the sense that if we're allowed just one assumption, which is that we care about, human well-being and flourishing, then I feel like we can use reason to differentiate between those two things. But again, that's recognizing that we have to have that critical assumption. And that's where I think Hume's statement that we can't reason an ought from an is correct. We cannot, purely using reason say one of those things is better than the other. But if we're allowed just that one, I think, critical assumption, which I would say all morally normal people can largely agree with, then I think we can use reason as a tool in those arenas. I'm not sure if you have anything to say to that, or if I should go to the next slide.
Yeah, I'll just finish by saying I think that he may overstate the case a little bit, but I think he's got a really good point. So yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Really good point and really good style. Look at that, gentlemen.
Yeah. All right. So the following slides are based off of Jonathan Haidt's paper titled "The Emotional Dog and Its Rational Tail: A Social Intuitionist Approach to Moral Judgment." I highly recommend reading it. It's a little bit heavy, but I think a lawyer like you will get through it no problem.
Yeah, I have not read this paper before. I have read The Righteous Mind, which sounds like probably expressing similar ideas. So
it does. All right. So according to Jonathan Haidt, intuition is not well studied, meaning there's a lot of work we still need to do, but it typically dominates conscious reason. So he gives this analogy, and you'll hear it around the internet. I hear it like at Faith Matters and other places. People will talk about, oh, that's like the rider and the elephant.
Right.
But the way he explains it is the mind is divided. It's like a rider on the elephant, and the rider's job is to serve the elephant. So we have this conscious stream of thinking, and its inputs are coming from our sensory inputs, our feelings and about things, how we feel about stuff like what's good, what's wrong. And go to the next slide. All right. And it acts like a lawyer. And, if a lawyer would serve its client by not trying to figure out what really happened. I mean, they may be concerned about that to some extent to prove their client innocent and explain that to someone else. But their idea, like in this picture, is the lawyer on the elephant is explaining why the elephant is eating that bush and not another one. Why is he there and not somewhere else, right? And so likewise with our own emotions, reason is there to explain to ourselves or others, why do I feel that way?
Right.
And I like this analogy. Reason defends the elephant's taste buds. And I think you can actually use, our preferences and dislikes for certain kinds of cuisine as a good analogy. But yeah, we have moral taste buds, and Jonathan Haidt's work has pointed out, I want to say it's like 10 or so. His book focuses on some, and I think they've added a few others. But these moral taste buds are how we judge things that we experience in the world. So, right, if I put celery in my mouth, I'm going to go, ew, and I'm not going to eat it. I'll judge that's bad. Other people, like my wife, are like, yum, that's good. All right, next slide. All right. Reason is very slow and requires mental energy. Haidt points this out, but so does Daniel Kahneman. He has a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow, where he goes over this slow way of thinking and how it's hard to use, because usually by the time we need to use the slow, difficult way of thinking, we've already made a judgment on something. And it requires energy. Like good people make bad decisions just by making them have to remember a phone number or something, right? You have to put energy into that. And it's not really energy. That's why I put in quotes, not the physics kind, but as far as we know. But you know how they say, like, if you are having a really bad day and you're struggling with somebody and you're really nice to this person at work all day, and you've spent all your moral energy on being nice to someone at work who's really bugging you, you go home to relax and your wife's like, can you help with dinner? You're like, no, and you struggle with it because you feel spent controlling yourself all day long. Right. This third one, conscious reasoning, gives us the illusion of control. And I think this fits in with the collective witness model well. Just because you're reasoning about something doesn't mean you're really controlling how you think and how you feel and your moral values. We believe our own moral judgment, the dog, is driven by our own moral reasoning, the tail.
Right. When really what Jonathan Haidt's theory is that Reason is basically justifying the result that our intuition has already arrived at in a way that we really don't fully understand. Correct?
Yep. And so this works in the other direction too. He says it's like using reason to convince somebody that you're right or wrong on a certain issue is like wagging a dog's tail to make it happy.
Right.
Maybe that actually could work. I'll have to try that later today. I don't know. It might a little bit, but it's really not likely to work very well, especially with, I think they call it the backfire effect and other things. Our minds are really primed not to let reason muck with us if we already have a strong belief.
Yeah,
But
there's this great...
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to give an example that, if you're kind of an open and interested, if you're willing to be curious, I think it's possible to let someone else's reason influence you. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. Like if you tell me something, give me a rational argument, my rational facilities can understand it, and it kind of goes down into my gut, and my gut says, oh my gosh, he's got a point. Or it says, oh my gosh, that guy's a total liar. I hate what he just said. Ultimately, I think our gut's in charge, but what we're doing when we reason with each other is trying to influence each other's moral foundations.
Yeah, one of the quotes that comes to mind with this, with this analogy here is there's this quote from Jonathan Swift that I really like that says, "You cannot reason a person out of a position they did not reach by the exercise of reason in the first instance." And what that means is, well, what that means to me is that if we're engaged in an exchange of reason and we're truly trying to set aside that intuition and operate rationally, is that we have to be willing to change our minds. But oftentimes what, Haidt's moral foundations theory basically posits is that there's heavy limitations on that, I guess is what I would say, that we don't even understand fully how it operates behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree. And the fourth one, we're all a bunch of hypocrites. AI generated this image like many of the others, and this one is just for demonstration purposes. But if you look at the correlation of how we feel and how we act, it's a lot tighter than how we reason and how we act. All right, this is a bit of an eye chart. Oh, look, it got rid of my icons. Fail. It works great. My icons show up in PowerPoint, but I had to put it on Google Drive to send it to you, and Google Drive doesn't understand the icons.
Bummer.
So anyway, what this is showing us is that we start off with the foundation of our own biology. Evolution has given us certain preferences and dislikes for things. We also have a culture, social learning that we gain from our parents, family, friends, and such. We get that from religion. We get that from being American, from working at a company. And those things influence our moral foundations. And those foundations that Haidt points out are care, fairness, loyalty, authority, purity, and liberty. And when something affects one of those, we use that moral foundation to judge it. And our judgment is automatic. It doesn't go through the reasoning process initially. Why? Because the reasoning process takes too long. You can think of a hunter-gatherer in the field and he finds a new fruit. Should I eat that? I don't know. I don't think I should, right? I've never had it before. Your moral intuitions are fast and they tell you not to.
Right.
You might reason about it later. Well, it looks good. It looks enticing. It looks good for food, right? Maybe Eve had to think about this a little while, but reason is slower. And so maybe it's safer to judge whether something's pure quickly rather than just thinking, oh, it looks good, I should eat it. Because there's a lot of berries out there that look good, but you shouldn't eat it. Finally, you get to reason. And I think we use reason to ourselves just to feel confident. And that's a feeling that helps us to just exist, right? If we feel confident about our moral judgments, we can make them. If we don't feel confident, it's harder. Maybe the world would be a worse place if we, didn't feel strong about our moral judgments. We just wouldn't know what to do. So reason is helpful in that. Also, reason is helpful in influencing others. We can tell people, hey, I had this experience. This is how I felt about it. Here's what happened to me. And that can indeed influence others, but oftentimes others will do things. I'm kind of hand waving this here. You influence with others, but others also provide a stimulus, right? They come back and they interact with our moral foundation. So it's like reasoning with a child. You shouldn't stay up past 10, right? And they don't believe you, so they get mad. And that influences your moral intuitions. Sometimes over time, you may think, well, fine, I'm not going to enforce a bedtime limit because each time I try to reason with you, you keep coming back and arguing. So I'm not going to enforce it anymore. Your moral foundation no longer gets mad at them and intuitively because they stay up past 10.
Right.
But there's also a secondary path that Haidt points out, and where the reason can edit the moral foundations and moral judgment. And I think he gives I don't know if this is him or me, but you really can go through a period of where you have to sit down and look at your judgments and just start to think, well, does that judgment work here? Does it work there? Would this judgment be different if I thought somewhat differently about that person? Like a good example might be you get mad at somebody who cuts you off in traffic. I mean, you're pissed, they're just a piece of crap. You reason in your mind that they should not have done that. It's against the law. There's no reason to do this thing. But then if you question it, well, what if that person was having a bad day like you are? Or maybe they need to rush to the emergency room, right? You can start using reason to question your judgments. And over time, you can change your mind about how you react to people when they do things that bug you.
Right. And I think one of the
advantages,
well, my big thought is I think one of the advantages of Haidt's theory is the same advantage I see in understanding like the other forms of cognitive bias is when we're aware that our brains are hardwired to make certain mistakes, it can give us greater insight into those moments of calm and repose where we can go through that secondary pathway and hopefully be more open to allowing reason or the rider on the elephant to have more control over the elephant than the elephant having more control over the rider. I feel like just understanding his theory, and I'm not sure that I fully believe some of the limitations, but I think it's still a useful theory, a useful model to talk about morality and moral judgments because of that fact, that the more insight we have into how our brains are hardwired to work allows us then to gain more control over them, to be aware of those limitations. It's like any other tool, right? Like if I know that I'm working with a calculator that is missing an 8 button, I'm going to have to come up with workarounds for how to use the number 8. And I kind of view it the same way. Like when we understand these limitations of our moral intuitions, then we're able to build in more corrective feedback loops, if you will.
Right, absolutely. One thing I added to that slide, there's a little, if you can go back to it real quick.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little dotted green arrow going from others back to reason.
Right.
And I think this is what people like you and Stephen Murphy are doing, is you create a openness and curiosity environment that helps people listen and be more willing to not put up roadblocks to the reasons that others might give. And by doing that, you're more likely to modify your own moral foundations.
Right.
Over time. Right. All right. You can go to the next slide. All right.
Great.
So back to my waiting analogy or slide. What I've changed here is now I have spirit and intuition almost completely eclipsing our collective witness and our reason. Plus, I've added social influences and lived experience as covering up the most of all of it.
Right.
The reason why I say that, and I think Jim Bennett used the word lived experience, right? And I'll use LGBTQ issues as an example. If you'd asked me 20 or 30 years ago, how I felt about gay marriage, I'd say it's wrong. It's gross. There's no way we should do that. But over time, and I'll call it lived experience, I've come to know people who are gays. I've known just a few acquaintances, a couple come to mind at work that are trans. And I have a nephew who's in a same-sex marriage. And just what I know of my nephew, of his struggles and difficulties in life. I thought the guy I had a hard time imagining he'd be successful in life at all. He had a lot of challenges growing up. Kids would tease him and everything went wrong. But there was this government program that taught him some work skills. He started working for Alaska Airlines. But he met a guy at that government program. They ended up falling in love and getting married, right? I didn't know he was gay. He never came out and said it or anything. Just one day he's married to a man. Interestingly, it's an interracial gay marriage. But as I've seen the fruit that's had in his life and how him and his partner have been so successful coming from a point of where they were disadvantaged. Well, it's told me two things. One, government programs can do great things in people's lives. We shouldn't be cutting them all. Mm-hmm. And two, his gay marriage has been such a benefit to him. There's no way I can tell him not to do it. Now, while I personally might find gay sex gross, I find his relationship with his partner beautiful. So that takes a lot of time. No one could argue that to me, except just knowing somebody and also just seeing it in the world. It takes time to influence our moral foundations. But I do think it's in the driver's seat. All right. So spirit or biases. So Jacob points out the spirit is a powerful tool, but can we be mistaken? Can our feelings of the spirit really just be our own desires or biases coming through? Could they just be sentimentality? So he throws a lot of doubt, between spirit or bias. And I think that's where what he's trying to say here is that we can't just rely on the spirit because, hey, we have biases. That's why we need to rely on also reason and the collective witness of others. And I don't totally disagree with that. But I think there's a problem here. My idea of what the spirit is somewhat evolving. I feel like the spirit and intuition, and I think he uses Jacob Hansen himself uses spirit and intuition somewhat interchangeably. Because he has a collective witness model here, and the other one that has 5 parts to it, he uses intuition, not spirit. Now, my understanding of spirit is, and I think it's something external coming from God, but if it is, it still has to interact with our moral intuitions. So think about church. Why do we go to church all the time? Why are we doing family home evenings? Why are we really trying to make sure we understand how to be a good Latter-day Saint? It's because we have to train ourselves to basically have and use the spirit. And if the spirit isn't external, well, the same rule applies, right? We could actually be training the spirit within ourselves when we do all this social learning together in groups. Trying to think if I had anything else to say on that, but yeah, I like how the scriptures put it. Instead of trying to recognize, is this the spirit or is this a bias? Just take it as a prompting. I'm prompted to do this, and then look at the fruits. So Jacob does include outcomes in his as one of the
new 5,
one of the witnesses in his newer model. But I really like how the scriptures do put it. They say, look at the fruits of the spirit to know whether something's true or not. And it doesn't say anything about reason, doesn't say anything about collective witness. It just of prophets. It just says joy, enlightened mind, desire to do good, edification, do justly, walk humbly, and a testimony of Jesus. Now, those can be kind of vague, but I think, looking at the outcomes of what you thought was the Spirit, and when they come back to bite you, you start to realize that's not the Spirit anymore. I just think that's how it works. And I think the scriptures are in line with that to some extent.
Let me ask you a question about one of these. So Radio Free Mormon and I did a longer response to an apologetic work called the Light and Truth Letter. And one of the things that we pointed out repeatedly talking about that letter is that oftentimes the way it was defining light and truth was informed by the author's culture, right? He grew up as a believing Latter-day Saint. So the way he's defining what is light and truth, and the way he's basically defining the fruits of the Spirit or the outcomes, is already informed by the system. So when we look at this, I'll just use the example here on the third bullet, desire to do good. Is there any concern for kind of like begging the question on your part, where what we define as good is often defined by the scriptures, and then the desire to do good is how we confirm the scriptures? I guess how have you viewed or solved or reconciled with that problem of like potentially circular reasoning when it comes to like defining good by the scriptures and then determining the outcomes by the guides that are given in the scriptures?
I have not solved this. I think the Jonathan
and I think that's
model kind of helps understand it somewhat. There's a circular feedback loop going on.
Sure.
Like bringing up same-sex marriage again, at least from a civic point of view, is that good or is that bad? Well, that changed over time. Why did it change? Because I reasoned better about it? I'm not so sure. I think reason did play a role. I heard arguments and what people were saying, but I think I also had personal experiences with people and others. And so what I thought good was changed over time due to the experiences. So if I have a prompting now, maybe somebody wants to argue the case that we should ban gay marriage. My intuition is going to say, no, it's not going to agree. And I think that it's just kind of a complicated overtime process. And a lot of it is based on what society has given me.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the honesty of that answer, John, because we're all grappling with how to be human in the best way. And I think that kind of reflects like an epistemological humility on your part to just say, yeah, I can't necessarily solve that problem. It's kind of similar to what I was saying about David Hume. And the truth is that, reason cannot by itself lead us to moral judgments. I think Hume is absolutely right that you cannot determine an ought from an is. And so I appreciate that, because I think it recognizes like the role that faith might play in that model, right? Like that's probably where faith can help kind of fill in some of these gaps that rationality or reason can't by itself solve.
Right. And this final quote is, and I'm sure there's some kind of a what do you call it, like a logical fallacy to this. He says, well, if you don't find his collective witness model convincing, just ask yourself, what's the alternative? And I remember listening to this and thinking, what is the alternative? I mean, my intuition told me maybe there isn't one. He's just really good. I don't know how he does this, but I had a hard time thinking that there could be an alternative. But as I thought about it more, I think there's tons of alternatives.
The logical fallacy inherent in what he's doing here is like, it's called like false dilemma. Like you have to choose this or something else. When the reality is sometimes the correct answer is to forestall judgment, to leave the answer blank until we have a sufficient reason to give an answer that has sufficient evidence. So this is like the inherent problem of abduction, which is trying to find an inference to the best explanation, when the reality is maybe the best explanation still isn't one that we should be convinced of. That's what I would point to. Right.
And I think I put a few slides in there about how I approach things differently. And I don't want to spend too much time on this since we're kind of running out of it. But I will say that just because I'm a Latter-day Saint, I take the modern prophet and what the things I hear in general conference, I take them very seriously,
Mhm.
right? Every time. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'll have an internal reaction against it, but I know I have to digest that thing and not filter, try to say, hey, there's something good here. I'm going to listen to it.
Mhm.
Go to the next slide. All right. So then I should ask, should I change something based on what I heard? And, you can look around in your heart and mind, find things that could benefit you and yourself and others. And I think there's a couple of paths you can take after this. You find things you can change, right? And so then you would do them. Maybe you find things that you don't find things to change. Well, obviously don't do them. Or you could find things that do change, or find things that change, but you have concerns and questions,
Mhm.
right? Well, do them, some of them, but not others. I think there's some
Right.
picking and choosing going on here. And it may be, and I'll give an example,
Mhm.
like learning that sugar is bad. There's influencers out there saying, don't have sugar, it's not good for you. I think modern medicine will say, yeah, you can have some sugar, but not too much. But maybe the prophet comes out and says, don't eat added sugar in any of your foods anymore. Let's say he said that. And I'm like, okay, wow, that's a toughie, but I do know it would be healthier. I know my doctor's telling me my A1C is kind of high. I need to exercise more. Maybe this taking sugar out's good. And so I'm like, I'm going to give it a shake. And I try it. And I find I don't like my foods as much. And my wife and I have done this, and I've noticed it. I don't stick with it very well, but as we start taking sugar and sweetness out of our diet, when you add it back in, you have an ew reaction to it.
Mhm.
That's not normal. And I actually experienced this in my military days when I was in Korea. Their idea of sweets or treats, I wouldn't call it sweets, very different from ours.
Right.
They wouldn't like a chocolate chip cookie. Treats are not sweet to them, at least to the degree we do it.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, a lot easier for them to keep sugar out of their diet. But we found that over time, listen, see how you can apply it, remove sugar from your diet. What was good, what you enjoyed before now becomes less enjoyable because you started to change your moral intuitions.
Mm. Great.
So that's how I do it. Now you may find, go to the next slide.
The next one still.
Yeah, next slide. Okay. Now you might find something is unhelpful. Maybe he says, maybe the prophet would come out, say, okay, no more eating vegetables. Okay. Yeah. I don't know what to do with that yet. Maybe there's some vegetables I'm eating that I shouldn't, but you try real hard and you just can't. You just can't accept this. I think there's a couple things you do. Keep it on standby. Maybe it'll make sense later. I can use it later. Voice your concerns and questions like, hey, we need fiber in our diet and all these things. You can push back. I believe strongly, like Jim Bennett does, that revelation is a two-way street. I think for almost any revelation you can find out there, it took probably too long, but it often took people saying, hey, what about this? Hey, I have this feeling, I have this idea. I think Joseph Smith did a lot of I hate to use the word reacting, but in some sense, I think he did react to the needs of people around him. And theology was able to grow out of the needs others had. So I think it's important that we voice our concerns and questions. And ultimately, you may just reject it. Say, I just think they're wrong about that. It's not because you did a collective witness on anything. You just can't see how it makes your life better. And you may end up saying, and I think this is important, don't pretend you're following when you're not. I think sometimes we can use reason to tell ourselves, oh, we're following this. I can rationalize why I'm really in spirit doing it when you're not. And I think that creates kind of a blindness that people have in thinking they're good letter saints, that they're not picking and choosing, but oh, yes, you really are.
Right.
All right. That's my alternative, and it's just one of many. So my final thought, we're all cafeteria Mormons. I think it's a decent analogy to think of it that way. The brethren serve up food for us. And some of it that we don't consume much, they may stop talking about and they may remove it from the menu. If we start eating a lot of stuff, sometimes they'll supply more of it. Or sometimes they'll push back. No, you can't I don't know. You can't eat Jello every day. I don't know. I do believe they do have their own relationship with God, and that there is something that they're looking out for us in ways that we really don't have time to do for ourselves. So they do choose the menu. There's definitely something to that, but there is some push and pull, and the cafeteria part, the selections that we make are highly influential, and I don't think they should be ignored. And I think that is worth dying for.
Well, I really appreciate this, John. I appreciate you, wrestling with Jacob's model, going to so much detail to kind of understand it. I think you did a really good job of offering his model, like giving a steelman version of his model. You did a very good job of laying out the areas where his model is strong, giving him credit for the victories that he's earned, but also kind of offering the alternative view where his model has some blind spots and has some issues. I really appreciate you being willing to offer that up for people. Even though my channel isn't necessarily directly for Believing Latter-day Saints, I hope to get a lot of people to listen to this particular episode, because I think your model is so much more mature, that it reconciles or deals with a lot of the issues that we've talked about in Haidt's theories, as well as just the limitations on human knowledge. I think one of the things I'm struck by is, as I grapple like with my own personal epistemology as well, is obviously I don't believe in a concept of the spirit anymore, but there are so many similarities between the advantages of your model that I see in my own personal epistemology, which is, rather than selectively kind of picking from a collective witness, I view it as using different tools for different jobs. And I think there's a lot of advantage to your model, because I think your model kind of recognizes the humanness of prophets, of the fallibility that prophets have. Even if we believe that they're well-intentioned, it allows for I would say, a more corrective feedback loop between the members of the church. And one of the messages I guess I would give to members of the church as a post-Mormon is, one of the grand messages I feel like of Joseph Smith's restoration of the gospel was the egalitarian nature of it. Of course, authority has always been a feature of the early church, but there is something so promising about the simple version of Joseph Smith going into the grove to pray and really wanting to understand. And I think there's something that could deeply help the church avoid some of the problems it's run into by relying too much on institutional authority, too much on thinking, well, we're going to continue doing it this way because this is the way we've always done it. That could be corrected if the members of the church, like you said, were a little bit more vocal about that cafeteria selection process that they're going through. I think it recognizes the way the church actually functions. And I really value you taking the time to put this presentation together and to offer it here on Let's Disagree. Do you have any other closing thoughts beyond what you've already shared?
I think that's it, but I honestly, I really look forward to seeing what AI generates for my image on your thumbnail. That's
I am very excited for that too. I was joking with, I had an episode come out yesterday. We're filming this on a Saturday, and I typically release on Fridays. I had an episode come out on Friday with Ganesh Cherian, and he was sharing with me that he loved the thumbnail, what AI came up with for the thumbnail on that. And I told him, I didn't start a YouTube channel just to make thumbnails, but if I'm honest, it's probably one of my favorite parts because it is very fun. So thanks again, John, for sharing your perspective with everybody. And I hope that the post-Mormons like me can recognize that your approach is so much softer, and I think more ideological. Well, when I say more ideological, I would say more ideologically consistent than the model that we've discussed today from Jacob Hansen. And I really value you coming to share that with us, because I think, one of the things I want on this channel is a space for people to support each other in principles that we share. And even if we may arrive at the same principles through different mechanisms, I think you and I share a lot of the same principles. So I'm very grateful for you doing today's presentation. Folks,
Thanks.
please give John some support in the comments, and we'll look forward to seeing you here on another episode of Let's Disagree and other interesting conversations. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned.